unbound. That's what we are trying to do. We are trying to unbind ourselves from things that just aren't the best for us, right? So, over the past several weeks, we've been talking a lot about the influence that our early lives continue to have in our choices and our experiences today. And specifically, we've been talking about how do we unintentionally block our own flow of blessings by holding on and repeating the past over and over in our thoughts. And last week my talk really was about letting go of the past and choosing to build a future that's free of the limitations and regret that we may be carrying from past circumstances that we don't want to carry forward. And I want to elaborate that on a little bit more today. So if we're going to leave the past behind, including our very young past, it's helpful to identify exactly what we no longer wish to carry on, to carry forward. And my lesson is called That Stops With Me. That stops with me. And it's an invitation to clearly articulate what it is that you want to shed with intention. And I want to talk about that this morning because what I know is that as we're trying to change our thinking, change our lives, we must remember that we absorbed so much of what our parents and grandparents experienced energetically, and we have the freedom to decide if patterns are continued through our lives or are they stopped. So sometimes to heal and grow our lives beyond these limiting ideas that we were kind of handed to us, right? We can choose to consciously release those vibratory patterns and mindsets that no longer serve us. And so often these things were picked up when we were so young that we really didn't even understand what was going on, and we couldn't interpret the adults and what they were doing, and we just absorbed what they seemed to be doing from our little young perspective. So I want to see if I can shine a light on what is possible by sharing some of the patterns or norms that I personally and consciously chose to discontinue in my own family lineage, all right, on purpose. And I want to talk about 3 of them today. And I chose them because they are 3 that are so very common, and maybe you'll see something in your own experience that is like I shed a light on something for you. And they are, number 1, emotional blackmailing, which is why I chose the year of no grudges. Emotional blackmailing. Number 2 is accepting violence as okay. And number 3 is controlling religion for others. Okay, 3 things. Raise your hand if one of those 3 things has something to do with you at all. Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm not alone. I appreciate that. So let me start with the first one. So one of my favorite figures in my whole life was my maternal grandmother, Ruth. Okay? I loved her with all my heart. And yeah, that's the grandma that left me on the step that didn't come to pick me up. That's an old story. Okay. So, but to be honest, my heart for my grandmother just couldn't be broken. Just couldn't. I adored her. She made her transition back in 2005. My daughter has her name as her middle name. Her name was Ruth. My daughter's Kelsey Ruth. So that being said, there are some aspects of my grandmother that I do not want to emulate. And one of them was her very fine ability to participate in emotional blackmail by holding a grudge and insisting that everybody be loyal and hold that grudge with her. Can you relate? Okay. So to help you understand, let me tell you a little bit more about my grandma. Okay, so when my grandmother was young, she fell in love with a young man, and I wish I could remember his name, but she just kind of beamed whenever she talked about this person. But the love was not meant to be because she told me that her parents did not think he was the right match for her. You know, she came from this farming family in rural Texas, and somehow her beloved was not acceptable to her parents. So she walked away from that deep, heartfelt love. And sometime later, I believe it was her sister who introduced her to the man that would become my grandfather, okay? Lonnie Brewer was his name, and he definitely had the approval of my grandmother's family because his family was also a farmer right down the road. So with that relationship like being sanctioned, they got married, they had the 3 children, the 3 girls, including my mom and her 2 sisters, and the bottom line is that my grandmother sacrificed her true love to marry my grandfather. Okay? So by the time I entered the picture, many, many years later, and was old enough to have kind of such conversations with my Nana, the relationship between my grandparents was kind of challenged. They were pleasant, just not very connected to each other, right? So I never observed affection between them or barely remember them actually kind of speaking to each other. They were just kind of little in their each other's orbits, but on their own. So fast forward to like the mid 70s, and they were in their 60s, and my grandmother enjoyed working. She just loved being around the girls at work. She just loved working. But my grandfather, he retired early, and he liked to go down to the coast in Texas. Port Arthur is the word. I've never been to Port Arthur, but it's good fishing from what my granddad would say. And he would go for like a few months at a time, and Nana would go with him sometimes, but often she would stay in Colorado and work instead and let him go. So you know where this story's going, right? So when I was 12, my granddad met a woman on one of those fishing trips, and soon he and my grandmother were divorced, and she drew an emotional line in the sand, right? I think she probably felt, if I could project onto her, that she had given up the love of her life to be with him. Why couldn't he give up this person to be with her? So at any rate, at that turn of events, my grandmother just changed drastically, and her emotional pain became she was so spiteful, and she was difficult whenever Granddad's name came up or he was included in any type of family situation. She was just so bitter as she held this grudge against my grandfather. And she subtly, or not so subtly, punished anyone who showed a trace of loyalty to Granddad. And I never heard her say another nice thing about Granddad. And she refused to have anything to do with his brothers and sisters, even though they were like how they were all friends and everything. She just wore her pain kind of like a costume. It was her identity. And as you can imagine, that kind of behavior had an impact on our whole family, right? Many of our family members kind of grew weary of my grandma's drama stuff, right? And distanced themselves because she always had the ability to twist stories and pit us against each other. And it was just one of those things. But I just had this big compassionate heart, and I just stayed in my grandmother's life very close, despite this anger and bitterness. So the end of my grandparents' story is also very interesting. So by the time they were in their late 80s, they were both living far apart. They were all close to their girls, but they lived definitely separate lives. And my grandfather died first. And since I had kind of remained emotionally open and connected to my grandmother, I volunteered to be the one to give her the news that Granddad had passed. And so when I called her to tell her about his death, she softened for the first time in years, many years. And then she said something like, I wish I'd written it down, I didn't, but she said something like, you know, I love the old coot, right? Like, I'm sorry for the girls to lose their dad. You know, she softened that. And his death kind of changed her. And I was with my grandmother the day she passed, and many of you know my lasting connection with her spiritually, but she was just a kind of a softer person after my grandfather died. So there's an interesting twist to this story. About 8 years before she died, I went through a divorce. I went through it. And like my Nana, I was blindsided as well. Blindsided. And I seemed to follow her pattern of going into anger and victimhood and bitterness and all of that. And Nana herself, because she was in my life really a lot at that time, she herself encouraged me to just cut ties with Sue Ann, Kelsey's other mom. Just cut ties. Cut them. Nana could see no reason to continue that contact. And for about 2 years, I kind of rode that horse down the road, like I did. And one day, Sue Ann herself even pointed out that I was growing as bitter as Nana. And I was like, ooh, ouch, ouch, right? Grudge holding. And I came by it honestly, not only from my maternal grandmother, but my dad's side of the family too. Um, his family was divided by siblings that refused to speak to each other. There's actually a term called emotional cutoff. They had emotional cutoffs with each other. Groups formed around loyalty. He had 13 brothers and sisters, so there was a lot of them to create little groups, right? And it was so confusing for me as a child to, like, that was my favorite uncle, and now all of a sudden I can't see him anymore. That kind of stuff was going on, and I just had to accept it, that, oh no, we don't talk to him anymore. It was really weird. So at some point in my spiritual journey, I was kind of working through my own divorce wounding and childhood wounding, and I made the mindful decision to stop. I was no longer interested in emotional blackmailing and victimhood and grudge holding. That would stop with me. I wanted to model for my daughter that when people hurt you, you have a choice as to your reactions and your response. Get help and get back into positivity as quickly as you can. Now, Sue-Ann, my ex-partner, and I, we really don't have a lot of co-parenting to do anymore, so we don't have a lot of contact. But we've spent the last 25 years or so making sure that Kelsey had everything she needs to feel connected to both of us, to all sides of the family. Emotional blackmail stopped with me. But what about the second thing? Accepting violence as okay. You know, I've shared many times around here, I've made no secret that my childhood was kind of fraught with violence from my father. He was emotionally out of control. You know, my mother, my brothers, and I, we were just all kind of targets of his rage. And I could tell you that I was often kind of scared in my house. And I knew, even then, I knew it was intergenerational patterns unfolding in my childhood home. You know, my father would describe his own parents as physically punishing, and he had all these 13 brothers and sisters, so I'm sure that was like maybe one of the only ways they felt like they could control all of these kids. I don't know. I'm sure the home was chaotic and unpredictable, but I do know that my father was simply repeating the pattern from his own childhood into his life with all of us. What he witnessed and experienced, he brought to us. So very early in my adult relationships, I took a stand. I would no longer tolerate violence or rageful outbursts at any time in my home or in my presence. I got into therapy in about my mid-20s to kind of sort through the residual effects of my childhood, and she helped me see that it would be so easy for me to view physical confrontations as normal. So I drew a boundary around that behavior at a really young adult age, like no. And then I get into parenting, like how do I know how to parent? I had to figure out how to not pass that down another generation. And I've been asked many times, how did you learn to parent Kelsey that way, so very differently from your own upbringing? I had no role models for gentle parenting. But somehow I made the decision that there would be no physical punishment in my home. Violence of any kind stopped with me. So through my emotional and spiritual healing, I woke up to the reality that all beings, including little Kelsey, were souls inhabiting a body, and she was on her own journey of discovery here, and I wanted her to experience parenting in the highest form. You know, I wanted her to feel cherished and loved as her own individual self. I wanted her to feel safe and respected and loved inside her body, never knowing that confusing entanglement of love and fear. That stops with me. And my third example is religious control. Again, this is intergenerational, especially on my dad's side. You know, his parents were fundamental Christians, and that was the only acceptable religious path at all. That's the only thing my father could choose, either nothing or that fundamentalist Christian stuff. And my dad grew up with this judgmental, punishing God, and that was the God he worshiped and expected my siblings and I to worship. And if you weren't in line with that, There was no love and acceptance available in my father's family. Remember all those factions. There's a good faction, a bad faction, right? This was the fundamental Christian faction, this was not. So one time I wrote an article about not being allowed to explore the world beyond our own religious backyard. So my parents were very, very encouraging us to, get educated, go figure out the world, go do your thing, but not religion, not religion. Nope, you're not allowed to grow independent and explore the world in that topic. I was expected to continue being a judgmental, conservative Christian, and although my father was dying when I walked away from all of it, the entire religious community basically severed ties with me when I did it. It was kind of like a spiritual blackmail if I look at it that way, right? But that stopped with me too. That stopped with me. As you can imagine, when I found this amazing philosophy, I wanted to expose Kelsey to all of these teachings, and I did. But as soon as she reached an age where she could be independent on a Sunday morning, I said, you go, you don't go. It doesn't matter to me. If it's not resonating with you, don't go. I encouraged her when she got a little older, study all the world religions. Take a world religions class. Figure out what they are. Whatever you find that resonates with you is great. I'm 100% comfortable with whatever path she chooses, even if she chooses not to explore it at all in this lifetime. She's her own soul, and I respect that. Again, my talk title is That Stops With Me, because through spirituality, I found that I had the power to stop intergenerational patterns and coping strategies. It's called intergenerational healing. And I started doing spiritual practice and working with professionals to set myself free from these intergenerational patterns. Here's a quote about this by Steffi Wagner. Pain travels through families until someone is ready to feel it. Take a deep breath. I guess I decided to feel the emotional blackmail and violence and religious abuse and demanded that it stop with me. At some point in my spiritual journey of doing my personal work, I almost felt like it was my calling to set myself free, thus set my daughter free from this intergenerational pain. But to do so, I would have to feel the feels and heal the heals, right? I had to do that. So Diane Shanette Wood said, pain demands to be felt. Somewhere along the line, a child will be born whose charge it is to feel it all. These are the ones who were born with the gift of feeling. And as we all know, you can't heal the pain that you refuse to feel. So I must have been that child who was born to feel it all, then heal it all. I don't know. Was it easy? No. It took many years and many healing and therapeutic relationships to move beyond the patterns I was just handed. But the rewards have been vast, and I'm free to see things more clearly. For example, today, I can compassionately see my grandparents as normal married couple who never worked on their relationship and grew apart. I can see how they started their relationship on a rocky ground because Nana loved another man that she couldn't even have, right? I can see that. Nana had a choice to make after Granddad made his choice to move on from the relationship. And she chose the most painful path for everyone involved. I can see that she modeled for me one way to do divorce, but that I could choose a different path. I could see that this higher path would unleash blessings my grandmother never got to experience in her world of blame and pain. Today, I can see that my father was violently abused as a little boy, pitted against his brothers and sisters from a very young age. I can see that rage build up inside of him and his raw emotions couldn't handle betrayal and disappointment and lack of control. I can see that we were simply being normal kids, but his feelings of vulnerability were too great for him to handle. I can see that hitting was easier for him than real communication in which he never developed the skills to have. And I can see that I was given the freedom to choose something different. And when I took a higher path, a more gentle and loving path, I unleashed blessings that my father never got to experience in his world of rage and violence. Today, I can see the need to religiously control others is just passing on a humongous fear of God and making sure that everyone else is fearful too. It is a form of false superiority, believing that the road you are walking is the only way to heaven and that everyone else is wrong or uninformed and doomed. Feeling like you are God's chosen one may be the only way some people ever feel chosen. But I've learned that taking a higher path of seeing all paths to God as valid releases blessings my father never got to feel. And giving that freedom to my daughter allows me to stay curious as the wisdom she finds along the way may come to me, opening my way of learning from her. Sometimes I wonder what my dad and my grandparents would want to whisper in my ear if they could, because on the other side, on a higher plane, beyond this human realm of existence, I believe they are simply love, pure love, spiritual beings with all the wisdom they lacked on this human plane and in those roles in my life. So as their higher selves, I bet they would have some powerful things to give advice about. I believe my Nana would tell me that holding on to a grudge and emotionally blackmailing others is pointless because in the end, the love you denied feeling all the way was the only thing you felt. I believe my dad would tell me to talk to my child and encourage her instead of pushing her away through pain and violence, because in the end, love is all that endures and fear is not even real. Nothing but love can change anything anyway. And I believe anyone on the other side will remind all of us that we're all on an individual journey of returning to where they are now. And that whatever way we can connect to God through prayer or ritual or community is perfectly fine as long as it returns us to love. So that's how this idea impacted my life. But the question is, can you see patterns in your own family or intergenerational life that you don't want to repeat any longer? There are so many thought patterns I could identify that we all can release ourselves from. Most of them aren't as dramatic as these three that I've chosen as examples, but they still block our good from showing up, and they include things like this. See if any of these fit. Deciding to stop the generational belief in a lack of resources, which leads us to hoarding and refusing to release things we are no longer currently using. That can stop with us as we learn that all energy flows, and the more we release, the more that can flow towards us. How about measuring our worth by external measures of success and purchased status? That can stop with us as we learn that in the end we will measure our life by our vitality, our purpose, our joy, and our shared love. Maybe we could decide to see others as individuals instead of grouping people by race or lifestyle or gender expression or anything else that divides people in your mind. That can stop with us as we learn to see all human experiences as valuable and equally important. How about we stop believing in superstitious ideas that some people have luck and other people don't? That can stop with us because we can learn that the universe is governed by impersonal laws that we interact with. How about we stop deciding to divide people by how they vote? That can stop with us because we can learn that some of us are guided by fear and some of us are guided by love, and that communication and community are the most powerful bridges we can build. How about we decide to accept irrational fears developed by someone else as theirs and not ours? Because that can stop with us as we learn to question and challenge fears that are handed to us. finding someone or something to blame for all the hard things that happen, why don't we choose to take responsibility for our reactions and choices? Because finding someone to blame can stop with us as we learn our own personal spiritual power. Here's the deal. We learn so many things by simply living amongst the people we lived among. I personally believe the adults when we were young did the best they knew how to do. We've got to figure out how to respect and bless our elders and our ancestors for teaching us what they knew, but knowing that it's our job to look at their wisdom from our current viewpoint and decide to grow from here. Our road of life will take us in the direction that we steer, not someone else's direction. We all know people who have risen far above their parents' experiences, kind of up-leveling the energy that runs through their lives as the blessings they enjoy. We also know people who have stayed small to live right beside the family, never questioning the mindsets and patterns that were passed to them. All of that stops with us. Will you pray with me? Take a deep breath. Here is what I know. What I know is all the power of the universe is in me. It lives in me and breathes as me. And I know that's the truth for each person hearing this prayer today. The Spirit of the Divine is available for us to choose and to choose from. And so I know for each person here that the road rises to meet them as they free themselves from any patterns that they wish to heal and release. And out of that healing and releasing rises more blessings, more flow, more joy, and more good. Because when anything is released, something better always takes its place. And if you know that with me, affirm it with me. And so it is. And so it is.